Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Fuds on Film podcast. My name is Scott Morris and I'm joined today by Craig Eastman.
Hello, my name is Stephen.
No, it's Craig. And Drew Tandale.
Hello, I claim no other name for myself.
So we are gathered here today to talk about director Lynne Ramsay, partly because she's Scottish and partly because she's a she, both of which we seem to have been lacking in experience lately. Lynne Ramsay, of course, born in 1969, he said. Not at all reading from Wikipedia, a Scottish director who's received quite a bit of acclaim despite having not really produced all that many films, so we thought we'd take this opportunity to explore her works and see if it's any good or not. So I think we will just start by going straight into her earliest feature film, which is 1999's Ratcatcher. Drew, would you like to give us a little bit of a spiel about that?
I would, Scott, I would. So I shall. I'm not going to be truculent about it. From Ratcatcher's opening, we're in no doubt that this is not your typical sentimental, wistful paean for a lost childhood. A boy wraps himself in a net curtain and he, and we, are sharply brought to our senses when he receives a smack around the head, and an admonition from his mum not to ruin our curtains. During the Glasgow dustman strike of 1973, bags of refuse build up on the streets and backyards of a council estate. Children play amongst and with the rat-infested rubbish, as well as in the filthy canal nearby. In the canal, two adolescent boys play, until one of the boys disappears beneath the water and doesn't return. While it is a tragic accident, the surviving boy, James Gillespie, played by William Eadie, could have, and should have, done more to help his friend. Instead, he flees, but he's never allowed to escape the tragedy, either in his private thoughts or, for example, when the boy's grief-stricken mother desperately hugs him to remind her of her dead son, or gifts James the new shoes she bought her son on the day of his death. Ratcatcher is seen mostly from James's perspective. He's a loner who tries to create his own entertainment when and where he can, while trying to avoid the pitfalls of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like being unfortunate enough to simply be around when a teenage gang is bored and looking for amusement. Or perhaps of being on the wrong side of his father, who is mean when drunk. He has his first physical experiences with girls in the form of the much older Margaret Ann, the Anne Mullen, a rather sad, bullied young woman who no doubt would cruelly have been referred to as the neighbourhood bicycle, but who clearly uses sex as her own way to survive in this hard, hard place. In many ways, James is still very much a child though, and Ramsay, who also wrote the screenplay, does a good job of portraying James's patchy and incomplete understanding of the world around him. The director's less narrative-driven, more impressionistic style evokes a strong sense of time and place, which, in comparison to films we'll come to later, works particularly well with this subject matter, which is far more about experience and feeling than it is about plot. She's aided in her portrayal of this era and setting by some great acting, including her own daughter as James's younger sister, though perhaps William Eadie may be too good at being cold-eyed and detached, as James himself is a pretty unlikable character, though this may well be intentional. Ratcatcher is an ugly film, a bleak film, and also an authentic film that in many of its characters and situations rings true, in an almost documentarian way at times, but it also contains sparks of humour, of hope, and of the irrepressible spirit of children. A slice-of-life film shorn entirely of sentimentality, though not entirely of tenderness. It's not an easy or particularly enjoyable watch, but it is rewarding enough for me to recommend checking it out, even if admittedly it's far from a wholehearted recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Ratcatcher well enough, but it's a hard film to recommend. It's got that sort of Mike Leigh misery feeling all the way throughout it, doesn't it? It makes...
Ken Loach certainly. It's got that Ken Loach sort of...
Yeah, sorry, Ken Loach is what I mean, actually.
Council estate, horrible bleakness, yes.
Yeah, everything's shit and it's never going to get better.
Yes, that's very much the tone of it.
Yeah. And it's certainly not approved by the Glasgow Tourist Board. It's very much playing to the stereotypes that they've worked very hard to distance themselves from. But yeah, it's a very grim film.
The whole tone is very much, we're doomed.
It's even sad when you see when James is like sort of escapes to the new housing estates that are being built, which would be I don't know what, out in Bishop Briggs or something like that. It's like it's not that much of a step up, if we're honest. You say authentic's a really good word for it. It does feel all very grounded, realistic, and relatable. Some of the characters, yeah, it's hard to empathise with them from what done, but it never feels like you're so distant from them. It's not like I can't understand why he would panic and run off and how that would haunt him throughout the rest of his life. And it's all a very relatable story, and one that's, I think, quite rewarding in its own way. But yeah, it's just not the happiest thing in the world to see.
No, and certainly by no means does every film need to be happy. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I've mentioned it before, I suspect we've all at some point made a similar point, that film can be escapism, it can be entertainment, but it can be reflection too, it can be highlighting things, it can be thoughtfulness, and I think you do yourself a disservice by only watching things that are escapist or hugely entertaining.
Film can also be a lens focusing the sun's rays to a point on a steaming pile of
Yes, but it can be difficult to watch something quite so bleak as this. I know there is and has been a lot of poverty in Glasgow, and there are very large parts of it that are very hard, both in terms of difficulty, but just in terms of that word meaning, describing the people as well. But it's by no means all of Glasgow, so I can see why perhaps Glaswegians wouldn't be particularly happy about this film. But it is authentic for that lower income part of Glasgow, particularly in that period.
Yeah, I mean, I stayed in the south side of Glasgow for quite some time, and I imagine if there was a rubbish collection strike, it wouldn't have looked all that much different to what they did in Ratcatcher here.
I was going to say we're all fairly familiar, some of us more than others, but we're all fairly explicitly familiar with Glasgow in many forms, and there are parts of that city now which are as cosmopolitan as any other major city anywhere in the sort of developed Western world. But then, like you say, Scott, there are parts where this probably looks depressingly familiar, and the only thing that's changed since 1973 is probably the wallpaper.
Yes. Favelas without the sunshine.
Yes, exactly. Drizzly favelas. But it is very compelling in its own way, and also I think as well one of those great pleasures in film is, in contrast to the sort of precocious child actor, which can be the most annoying thing potentially in film, is when a sort of unknown and untrained, as I think William Eadie might have been, talent comes along and absolutely excels. It can a young talent rather. It can be a very enjoyable thing, and if there is any enjoyment to be taken from this film, I think definitely it's definitely in the performances. I saw it a long time ago. It aired on STV. It must have been about 10, 12 years ago, I think I must have initially saw this film. And I haven't thought about it much since. And actually watching it again now, it doesn't bear a lot of resemblance to my memory. I don't remember it being as overbearing and depressing as this, but it's certainly it's certainly a more enjoyable piece in some respects than the film I'll be talking about. But it certainly marks Ramsay out as a talent. I'm not sure how I feel about it sitting within the Criterion collection, but
it's impressively strong for a first time outing.
Yes.
She's clearly got a very strong style and a strong vision, which she's brought to the screen. What's kind of striking about Lynne Ramsay is that she only has done 4 feature films thus far, but from her very first one, she clearly has a very strong sense of style, of purpose.
Yes.
It's not something I think is particularly successful most of the time, but quite clearly she has a style which a lot of first-time filmmakers can struggle to find, or certainly to maintain, which she certainly has done. And just got to your point too, Craig, about the child actor as well. I don't know why, but actually in this sort of film, with this sort of setting, often a poorer setting or more realistic, that quite often a director can find particularly naturalistic talent. Because in this, William Eadie very naturally not at all that precocious child actor thing. And whether it's simply because they've not been through theatre schools and stuff, if it is just they are just first time acting, that helps a lot, I think. I'm thinking too about, and Scott mentioned Favelas, so it's appropriate, but things like City of God, which was cast nearly entirely from unknowns, from just kids they got in the street. and the naturalistic performances of them in a setting they know too, just really is what made that film work so well.
I've read a couple of pieces about Lynne Ramsay, and there's some suggestion that, because she works, we'll probably talk about it a bit more as we go along, but she works quite frequently with untrained talent and just sort of people who just occupy roles which she comes across in her daily life, and where she will cast them in her work, and a lot of it apparently, or the interpretation seems to be, stems from her own upbringing. She's a very humble background. I think it was, I can't remember which of her parents it was, but she's basically the daughter of a bartender. She doesn't come from some sort of Hollywood liberal elite background. She grew up in, I believe it was Glasgow, with a parent who was a bartender, and that is Lynne Ramsay's story, and that is what she knows, and I expect perhaps find some truth in when she's working in these pieces and these environments. So
yeah, if you look at Ratcatcher and a couple of her shorts, Gasman and Small Deaths in particular, yeah, you do very much feel that it's coming from experience, that this is not interpretation, this is knowledge. It's not invention or anything.
And I think, and again, we'll speak about it as we go on, for all the flaws which you've already touched on, Drew. I think it's one of the more compelling things about the way that she works. But
I was like, just going to mention too, just we were talking about Glasgow, and I don't want to bag on Glasgow. Glasgow, like most even medium-sized cities, has the rich and the poor in it. And I think, and we mentioned Ken Loach too, I think there's a lot of this that would ring true to very many places in Britain, particularly ex-industrial places where industry's really fallen off. But even, London, one of the richest cities in the world, also has some of, if not the worst poverty in the UK at the same time, as is often the case with huge cities. So
often right next to each other as well, which is the case in Glasgow
absolutely.
too.
Yeah. It speaks in Glaswegian, but it doesn't necessarily speak solely to Glasgow.
No, I can, some like, London, Manchester, Bradford, Birmingham, perhaps, any of these things, I have this feeling that without knowing it, those cities anything like as well. And Edinburgh too, although Edinburgh's a much smaller city, so it doesn't feel quite the same, but certainly it has the large areas of poverty too. But I think for any reasonably sized city in Britain, that this has a good chance of ringing true to someone at least.
I think you'll remember, you guys will probably remember, I don't think it's there now, but when you drove into Glasgow on the city centre approach along the M80, you used to come in past the big sort of gas storage tanks on the way in, and there was one of them that had that slogan, "Glasgow's smiles better," written on it, with a big smiley face on it, that was there for years, since I could
Mr. Happy, remember. Wasn't it?
Mr. Happy, yeah, Glasgow smiles better. And this film just feels like a big off to that. That's the best way I can think to sum it up. But yeah, like you say, it's not, I don't imagine will be for everyone, but it feels like a compelling piece of work.
Yes.
Shall I talk about Morvern Callar, Scott?
I think you should. You don't need my approval. You don't need my permission.
But it's still nice to have, Scott. It's still nice to have.
I disagree. I don't think you should talk about it, but then again, you've gone to the trouble of watching and writing about it, so
well, the people in the film certainly don't want to talk about it. But no. When Samantha Morton's Morvern Callar wakes up on the lounge floor next to the body of her author boyfriend, she finds his computer beckoning her to read his suicide note. In it, he expresses his love for Morvern, the determination that slitting his wrists while he slept, quote, seemed like the right thing to do, unquote, and that she is to submit his completed manuscript to a number of publishers and use the money he has left in his bank account to pay for his funeral. So, Morvern instead decides to aimlessly hang around an empty train station, pop a pill and go out drunkenly partying with her friend, reveal herself to a passing fishing boat, and sleep with a complete stranger. Then, after a couple of days of working around her boyfriend's body, she chops it up in the bath while listening to a mixtape he left her, buries the remains in a remote shallow grave, edits the manuscript to name herself the author, and uses the burial money to pay for a party holiday in Ibiza. Now, we all deal with grief in different ways, but what I'm saying is that I found it very difficult to sympathise with Morvern, as the protagonist in a story that deals with, well, I don't really know what it deals with, to be honest. So I guess that means I just don't buy Morvern as a protagonist. But I'll come back to that in a minute. There is actually a good deal to appreciate about Morvern Callar. Everything about the movie is steeped in economy, beginning with Ramsay's direction, which, separated from the script, I like very much. There's a confidence in the way she allows the story to run its course, which speaks to an experience beyond a typical sophomore filmmaker, and her trust in Morton and the rest of the cast, whom I understand, as we've mentioned, to have been largely, if not entirely, untrained, is fairly obvious. There is a maturity which makes me marvel at how infrequently Ramsay has worked, yet also glad that she hasn't felt the need to keep pace with industry expectation. Here is a director I want to see only when they are good and ready to say something, even if I'm baffled by their message. The movie is likewise shot with a refreshing lack of visual verbosity by Alwyn Kuchler, Ratcatcher alumni and a name with which I was not familiar, therefore forcing me to kick myself when I discovered he worked with Danny Boyle on Sunshine. Out with the confines of city and town centres, Scotland is a frequently blunt and miserable array of matter, which, admittedly stunning mountainscapes and coastlines aside, often presents itself in the guise of mud, heather and grass-covered tilty bits, interspersed with broad strokes of ill-maintained tarmac we call roads. All you need to know about Kuchler's work here is that he does some of those justice. In terms of performances, Morton is a wonderful choice for the role because she is as close to a flawless actress as I believe England may have produced, and she is blessed with that ability to say as much, if not more, with her expressions when silent as when emoting at full tilt. Not that there will be much in the way of tilting here, you understand, as that economy I have mentioned extends with prevalence to the writing of Morvern, who is as enigmatic, if not engaging, a protagonist as I may have ever encountered in film. And this is the crux of my issue with the movie. As engaging as Morton is, and even though her abilities seem to come from the cosmic ether, unlike that vacuum of potential energy from which I believe she is born, even she cannot be expected to manifest something from less than nothing. If Morvern is experiencing some sort of inner anguish at the death of her lover, some existential turmoil or critical metamorphosis, then I, as the viewer, am not to know of it. We know nothing of Morvern's life. Her relationship is perhaps implied to have been an emotionally and or intellectually unequal one, but I base that solely on my assumed verbosity of the deceased and Morvern's borderline mute presence at her menial job in a supermarket. I suppose I must also assume that statistically speaking, her boyfriend is unlikely to have shared her proclivity for dismemberment, so that could probably be considered an inequality too.
Opposites attract.
Yes. I'm all for enigmas, especially human ones, and a lot of the performances I've appreciated throughout the years have been those where an actor's eyes have said more than their pie hole. But I can only reasonably be expected to engage with that enigma if their reasoning, history and impetus are not all completely internalised to the point of nothingness. I find myself infuriated by the talent so clearly evident in virtually every other aspect of Morvern Callar. It's like being handed a note by some mysterious figure who says, "Read this, your life and the lives of your family depend on it," only to find out it's been written in invisible ink. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that this is the only film in which I've seen Samantha Morton where she hasn't engaged me. I trust you implicitly, Samantha. I really do, and I'm willing to accept that it may well be me, not you, but this just isn't for me. There are plenty of people who claim Morvern is a compelling character. I know that because I've spent a good deal of my free time today desperately reading through IMDb user reviews in the hope of unearthing some truth about her, if not perhaps my own intellectual and emotional shortcomings, which I can only presume to be the reason for my failure to grasp her. And to those people, all I can say is this: what is your evidence? I'm slightly frustrated, I'm guessing you can probably tell. I desperately want to like Morvern Callar as, on a level of craftsmanship, it has considerable chops, and I even find myself comparing it favourably to great British low-budget works of atmosphere of recent years, such as Dead Man's Shoes, for example. I just don't know what it is I'm buying here, and it's driving me nuts. Someone please tell me I am not going nuts.
Well, I can tell you that if you are going nuts, I'm at least on the same path with you.
Are we on the crazy train together?
Perhaps so, because
Oh.
because what you have said is almost exactly how I feel about it. It's like I can appreciate all of the craft and things, but I'm
Yes.
just like, to what end is this craft?
Thank goodness for that. And I don't even know if I'm supposed to sympathise with her or dislike her.
I kind of dislike her. I'm not sure if that's the point or not, but yeah, there's not really enough of a character there to really dislike or like.
No, even though they have chopped someone up in a bath, that is normally a pretty good sign that you're not supposed to like that person.
Yeah, but because there's no malice there. Clearly, she's grieving. She's shocked. She's grieving, and people deal with grief differently. And when I must admit, I was thinking that body must be honking. The smell must be unbelievable. But when she's not telling anybody that her boyfriend is dead, that she's leaving the body there and things, I was okay with that. I was on board with that. I understood, yes, this woman, she's shocked, she's grieving, she doesn't really know what she's doing, where she is, okay? But then she takes the step of dismembering a body. Like, no, this is just now a completely different film. But yes, at the same time, Craig, I'm not disliking you for that.
No,
I'm more
because
just baffled.
it's rendered so ambiguous that you can't even factor that into the decision-making process of whether or not you are supposed to like this character.
That's the thing. Like, everything else makes sense. Like her putting her name on the manuscript, okay. Her sort of not quite pretending he's not dead, but deciding not to confront it.
Yeah,
and going on holiday.
I feel like there's a better film, Drew, where all that happened was in a fit of madness or grief-induced madness or grief-induced whatever, or if we were given some sort of clue as to what the nature of the relationship was and she felt she had to have some revenge on him, that she put her name on that manuscript and it sold, and she used that to fund some sort of excursion to Ibiza with a human being rather than an alien in the lead role. I think there would be a far more compelling film to be had there that might have. And I'm not saying a film has to have an obvious message, but at least a message that one could buy into.
Yeah, it's a strange one. It's like everything else kind of fits to it. Like, yeah, does want to confront the death. Okay, she spends the funeral money on a holiday instead. She's kind of just wants to go a bit crazy. All of that I understand. It makes sense. And even if she'd gone to Spain and had left the body in the flat or something.
Yeah.
All of that kind of makes sense. But there's one bit, and again, you feel like you should really dislike this character because she's playing music while she's doing it, she's got sunglasses on, and it's just, but it's because it's so strange and it's so, ambiguous is a good word. It's silly. I have no idea what's going inside her head there.
It feels like there might be an entire first act missing from this film where we establish the nature of the relationship, and everything else thereafter hinges on that and might give us some sort of clue as to what she's thinking. But there's just none of that.
Yeah, because the most you get is when she's talking to Lana, Kathleen McDermott's character, and when she tells her they're sitting in the bath together, and she says, he's left me, and Lana says, oh, it's probably just another one of his moods. So clearly she was aware that he was depressive, and perhaps that the relationship had been a sort of on-off kind of thing, something like that maybe. That's the only hint you get about what was really going on there. But
and her colleagues at the supermarket saying, oh, don't worry, he'll be back with his tail between his legs.
Yeah.
You might assume that this is not the first time. This is the first time that she's been bereft of him, just not necessarily in the circumstance it presents itself now.
Yes, whereas, all of the other potential grief things make sense apart from the dismemberment, and it's so strange. Like, it does, like you're saying, Craig, is it like a revenge thing? Had she felt in some way either physically or mentally abused by him or something? It's missing something. But at the same time, yes, you don't immediately hate this character. That may be more to do with Samantha Morton's innate likability.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yes, at the same time, I don't hold her in quite as high regard as you seem to do, Craig, but although I have liked her a great deal in many things. So I do see where you're coming from too, that it's hard to really get a handle on her or her character in this film.
It feels like she and Lynne Ramsay have had some fantastic discussions and have a very definite trajectory for this character. They're just not letting us know what it is.
Yes.
But I've got a sneaking suspicion from his silence that Scott is sitting on an opinion bomb on this one.
No, I've been keeping silent because you're basically saying what I'd be saying. It is strange that it has got to be the least prejudicial showing of a dismemberment than I've ever seen in film, which normally has at least some implied criticism that you just don't get here, which is refreshing in a way.
It was a good 30 seconds before I even cottoned on to that's what she was doing.
Yes.
Yeah, at first, when you see she's got her foot on the edge of the bath, and she leans down,
toenails or something,
and you see this blood spurt, and I actually thought at first she was harming herself, like she was digging a razor into her legs or something like that, and it was her blood, and it's like, oh, no, right, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so strange. It's so non-prejudicial. It's so strange.
Yeah.
And I'm on the same page with you for most of the rest of it as well. It's it's one thing presenting a character as an enigma, but that does imply there's some sort of solution to it, and I don't think there is in this case. For all that, I didn't hate it, and I echo what you're saying with the rest of it. Every other aspect of it is really well done, and much better than you'd expect, as you say, for just a second time feature outing.
I almost kind of admire its willful obtuseness.
Mm-hmm. And overall, I still would actually say I hated the film. I watched it and enjoyed it well enough, but just at the end of it, I'm just left with a big question mark over what was that about?
Everything.
Really? Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't really even end satisfyingly too. She's in Spain. She finally meets the publishers. Okay, and she gets the money, and okay, right. So maybe she's thinking, "Oh, I'm going to change my life or do something." I was still thinking, is this dismembered body going to come back to haunt her, so to speak? Is this still going to be a thing? And she comes back and basically she gets a check and kind of just looks at her life and shrugs, and they film ends because she's left. It's like,
it's like, I don't. At the end of the day, a film that leaves unanswered questions, often a very satisfying thing. I don't necessarily need something to empathise with. Just give me something to understand.
I don't mind the unanswered questions if I had any idea what the questions ought to be in the first place, and I'm not entirely convinced that I do.
Don't just write a question mark on a frame of 35mm film and go, £8, please. Dear.
Yeah, it's one thing being a mood piece, but when the mood is just confusion, it doesn't really satisfy quite so much. Yeah.
Yes. We're going to go in more into this later, but I hadn't actually seen any Lynne Ramsay stuff before preparing for this podcast. And I think I don't actually like a single Lynne Ramsay film, but at the same point, there's not one that I actually dislike either. And I certainly find something interesting in all of them.
Yes.
But I'm particularly baffled by this one. Like, I don't know, is she a bad person or is she just a troubled person? Or I really don't know.
Well, look, full disclosure, at this point, I won't be offering our listeners opinions on the next two films we talk about because I haven't had a chance to watch them yet. But I will at least be watching You Were Never Really Here because I am compelled to find out whether I am as baffled by it as I am by this, and whether it shares the same traits of craftsmanship and competence that the rest of her work does, but just without this baffling non-message.
Sure. I mean, I think it's fair to say they're acquired taste. I don't think I dislike any of them, and there's. Yeah. I think I actually would say I like 3 out of 4 of them that we cover here in the features at least. So
I need to actually correct myself there. There's one actually I really do like, which is the one you're going to speak about next, Scott. But
yes,
I just because there aren't any that I dislike. There's none that I regret watching. I kind of wish I liked some of them more than I did. Mm-hmm. But there's none that I would say were bad films. I'm just. With this one,
it's a weird thing to say baffled. That you've appreciated the artistry of something that much, but that you can't actually say that you've enjoyed it as a film. But I don't know. So what are you going to talk about next, Scott?
We need to talk about Kevin. That is the name of the film and also an instruction.
Crossbow Kevin.
Yes, there's a really quick capsule summary of we need to talk about Kevin's plot that really underplays everything in it, and also the way that the film's structured. And in the spirit of its aggressive non-linearity, I'd intended to similarly structure this recap. However, it's been an exhausting week in an apparently endless series of exhausting weeks, so let's go with clarity over cleverness here. So, to Tilda Swinton's Eva Cachadorian and John C. Reilly's Franklin, a child, Damien. Wait, no, Kevin.
Although, certainly the child who plays the second youngest version of Kevin seen on screen could easily be the child from The Omen, because he is evil.
So Kevin appears to learn the joys of gaslighting at an early age, being an insufferable jackass to Eva whenever Franklin's not around, and sweetness and light when he is. Kevin, played by Ezra Miller once he reaches the quote-unquote difficult teenage years, which is a bit of an understatement in this film, shows signs of having something very wrong with him from his youth. And that's something that Eva continually revisits in the movie's present, where she finds her situation markedly worse than in the flashbacks. And I'm dancing around what might be considered a spoiler here, but, well, it's a 7-year-old film at this point, so consider yourself well warned. Yes. She's now the town pariah and also suffering from post-traumatic stress after, final warning, Kevin's interest in archery graduates into a school mass murder. Now, much of the film is a character study in survivor's guilt, but as much as it's treating it seriously, there's also an element of the unreliable narrator in here, and I say this because Eva's remembrance of Kevin's behaviour is much closer to coming out of The Omen than seems entirely reasonable. Perhaps I'll open that up to the floor a bit later on, but in the interest of clearing my opinions out of the way, I like this film a lot. It's the best performance, I think, that I've ever seen Tilda Swinton give, and Ezra Miller's worryingly convincing as a sociopath. This level of non-linearity often annoys me in film because it's frequently a transparent distraction from a weak narrative, but this is really effectively deployed here, and it makes Swinton's character all the more sympathetic. Ramsay's visuals haven't exactly been weak in her previous films, but the higher budget of this Hollywood outing allows for a glossiness that wasn't there before, certainly in the probably also embellished memories of happier moments with John C. Reilly, whose underuse would perhaps be my only issue with the film, but then again, it's not about his character, so it's not really. I just always want to see more John C. Reilly. Hollywood, sort it out. So, I mean, if you want a recommendation now, I approve it, and I think you should all watch it.
I really, really enjoyed this. By far the most satisfying Lynne Ramsay thing, and it's something I'll mention later, but I think because while I appreciate emotion, mood, character, all those things, narrative matters more to me in most films than anything else, and this has a stronger narrative than any of our other films.
Yeah.
And I've not read the book. I know the book's pretty well regarded too, and so I can't speak to how well it follows the structure of the book. But I hadn't actually given any consideration to the unreliable narrator point that you brought, but you do make a good point in that it does seem like The Omen. It's just so over the top, the evil things this child does.
Yeah, a lot of it, the way it's framed and shot, reminds me more of horror films than it does of anything. It's more like a psychological study than it does. It's certainly leading into genre than more than you'd expect for something like this, I would say.
Yeah, but at the same point, those sort of, because if you don't, I mean, I knew what the book was about, so therefore I knew what the film was about, but the film does do a good job of hinting what's going to come, and you can work out fairly early if you're not familiar with the story, but sort of you see where it's going, and you see the flashes and stuff, and so it's just, I mean, it works too. That sort of fractured narrative works because the woman's mind is clearly fractured.
Yeah.
And I don't really like Tilda Swinton a great deal, but I've never seen her better than in We Need to Talk About Kevin. I think she's fantastic in this.
Yeah.
I don't have an awful lot more to add to what you say, apart from this film probably represents the nadir of the one thing I've found that I really dislike about Lynne Ramsay, is that she's hella heavy on the symbolism and imagery. It's over the top in this film, and it was kind of driving me crazy by the end. It was okay, I get the idea that Tilda Swinton's character, Eva, is, well, you say survivor's guilt, also like, yeah, she thinks she has blood on her hands because it's her child that's perpetrated this crime. See, by the 812th time I've seen her with metaphorical blood on her hands, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
And it's just so heavily overplayed, and it was doing my head in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only real criticism I have of this film. I thought it was just a thoroughly compelling film, excellent performances. Ezra Miller, who I think I've only seen briefly in the Amy Schumer film Trainwreck. Apart from that, in the Justice League, and I thought he was appalling in the Justice League.
I didn't realise he's the guy that plays the Flash.
Yeah, not in TV Flash, but in Justice League, yeah. That's the only thing I can remember seeing him in, apart from that small part in the Amy Schumer film. He's great in this. He's just evil, but kind of like knowing and intelligent evil rather than just creepy evil.
Yeah,
he's a fantastic, it's a fantastic job in this.
What makes it actually is one of the very last scenes where he's talking with his mother in prison. Finally, after seemingly not really describing what was going on properly for the years since it happened, and where it kind of breaks through that maybe he's past whatever mental imbalance was causing him to do this stuff, and he just sort of doesn't really know what's happened to him anymore. That's a nice little scene at the end to kind of tie that back a bit and makes him a little bit more human, whereas before he had been coming across very much as let's say a horror movie protagonist. And yeah. So it's nice to see what happens to Jason after he's been through a couple of rounds of psychotherapy.
Yes. So I really don't have much more to say other than that this is the only one I would recommend without reservation of her films that I've seen. I just thought it was extremely well acted. It's really well shot. It is the extra budget shows, and it helps. There's a sort of a crispness to this film that the previous two films didn't have.
Yeah,
that appealed to me. But my only real issue with this is just that the symbolism and imagery, and I'm not the only person who's made this criticism from what I can gather from reading about her films in the last few days. The symbolism and imagery is so heavy-handed in this. Like I said, there are so many scenes where she's washing blood or metaphorical blood off her hands, and then probably it feels like 50% of the film is swathed in red paint or red dye or red light or red lights or tomatoes. And I guess it's some sort of festival in Spain or something, or Italy at the start, I think, with a lot of tomatoes. That from the very beginning, the film's steeped in blood, and it's like, okay, I get it, but steady on, eh? A bit of restraint would have been nice.
Yeah.
Other than that, that's my only complaint with the film, is because everything else is just so well done. Fractured narrative, non-linear narrative, like you say, Scott, sometimes it can be a distraction.
Yeah.
It's from a less than stellar plot, or it could just be that somebody likes that idea and doesn't really know how to deliver it. Definitely not the case here, and it really matches up with the kind of the fractured mind. And actually, now thinking more about the unreliable narrator thing, I think you may be onto something there, because I was taking a lot of the stuff quite literally.
Yeah.
And I probably should have thought a bit more about that, because some of it is just it feels so unbelievable that a young child could do these things, outside of The Omen.
I mean, I've no real basis for that other than that's what I thought when I was watching it this time through. I'm pretty sure I didn't take anything like that from it the first time I watched it, 7 years ago. But yeah, and I've not really read anything about it since, but when I was watching it this time, it seemed like that was the most obvious solution to squaring that, because otherwise it could just be a little bit silly. And I don't think it is a silly film. I think it's got something a bit more artistry behind it to just dismiss it in that regard.
Yeah, it's the first time I've seen it. So maybe on a second viewing, without having had this conversation, I would have thought that anyway. I was just quite engaged by the whole film. And I was, apart from, and really it's the imagery, the heavy-handed imagery, it was really bothering me. So I was sorry to keep going on about it, but the other thing was more, I was spending a lot of my mental energy on thinking about the way people were treating her, and I'm thinking, okay, I can understand to some extent why you're blaming the parent of a child who did this, but at the same time, she didn't do anything wrong. She didn't kill anybody.
Yeah.
Even to think about that more, it's like, well, maybe, the unreliable narrator thing too. These flashbacks of a sort that she's having of her time with Kevin, perhaps that's her kind of rewriting her own history to justify it to herself, that it wasn't her failing, that it was in fact the child was evil.
Yeah, she was born that way. I mean, when I was watching this time too, I think the only thing that stuck out as me as being strange is, why hadn't she moved? I mean, it was one thing to say you'd be leaving your life behind, but it's not much of a life to leave behind as it's shown here, so I just got out of town, I think.
That's just, I know she's, clearly, you do hear one point where I guess her lawyer says to her at some point, you're going to lose the house and things because people are going to sue her for compensation or something. So she doesn't have much money, it would seem, but I'm okay with that. I hated the house. I always hated the house. And it's clearly, whatever her and her husband do, they make a lot of money, because it is literally a mansion.
Yeah.
And then she's moved to this very small house afterwards. But yeah, could you not have moved to at least the next town over or something?
Yeah.
I realise she's going to have reduced means after that, but she had enough money to get a house somewhere. Could it not have been in a different town?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's strange. So that feels a wee bit artificial. All you need to do is write one small thing about it, that she's simply, for some reason, financial probably, that she wasn't able to move out of the town, or she had to stay in that house because she couldn't afford to do anything else or something like that. That's the only other minor niggle I have with it. I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, I'm picking nits here. It's
Absolutely. So am I.
It's a really great film, but one that definitely should be on anyone's watch list.
Very compelling indeed. I might check out the book as well now.
Check it out.
So after we need to talk about Kevin, there was a bit of a gap in Ramsay's
6 years.
biography, because part of that, of course, was because she was embroiled in the saga of Jane Got a Gun, which
Yes.
I'd forgotten about that.
I'd forgotten about that till this afternoon. I remember when we talked about it a couple of years ago that it'd come up, but I'd entirely forgotten about it until today.
Yeah, so a very troubled production, which she eventually shed herself from, probably with good cause when you see the final product.
Was it Natalie Portman who was originally involved in that one? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently, I mean, she left because of creative differences, left on day one, but there was also apparently at least accusations of dodgy financial dealings, I guess, by the producers.
All right.
It was a whole cluster mess, as I understand it.
Was Uwe Ball involved at some point?
So the next feature that came out just mere weeks ago, I think, actually, in the UK at least, is You Were Never Really Here. So Drew, take that away.
Yes, Scott. It was at Cannes last year, but certainly here, and I think in the United States as well. It only just came out in March. Been on the shelf largely for a year.
Wow.
Now, while I have, admittedly, done it before, and on more than one occasion, I try to avoid, if I can, describing a film in terms of it's X meets Y, or it's a cross between A and B.
Thank God, I thought you were going somewhere else with that statement, Drew.
Genuinely, I'd lost to what you mean there, so that's probably a good thing, because otherwise I suspect I'd be insulted. But yeah, I do try to avoid it, as it can be reductive and potentially dismissive. There are times, though, when describing a film thusly is a useful shorthand, and so it is with You Were Never Really Here, which is a cross between Taken and Equalizer, but with a more art house bent. Ex-Marine Joe, mumbled by Joaquin Phoenix, is a loner. His only meaningful relationship with another human being is with his elderly mother. He is plagued by images of a violent past, both in his childhood and in his military career, and he seems to find catharsis, of a sort, as well as earning his living, in taking contracts to rescue young girls who have been taken into the sex trade. Contracts he carries out with efficiency, brutality, and a hammer.
Cool.
When asked to rescue his daughter by a New York state senator who says he can't go to the police because of mumble, quick look over there, things go very badly wrong in a plot straight out of 1,000 airport novels and 6 seasons of police procedural TV series. Can you say cliché? Bizarrely, this film was in contention for the Palme d'Or at Cannes last year and has been compared repeatedly and favourably to Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, presumably by people who have never actually seen Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. Okay, maybe that's not entirely fair. There are some parallels, but little comparison. I described this earlier as a cross between Taken and Equalizer, but with a more art house bent, which in this case I'm sad to say means with all of the action removed and anything that would make this in any way fun. Though one thing all of these films have in common, of course, is male heroism predicated on saving women in distress. As a result of that, I had high hopes for the notably not a man Lynne Ramsay bringing a new, different perspective to the genre, but those hopes were sadly dashed.
Oh, I was going to say, I was assuming that was where you were going with this, but...
Well, I mean, to a degree it has. I mean, it's a standard issue revenge fantasy with most of the revenge cut out of it. So.
Yes. So, yes, sadly dashed hopes. Now, while the sequels can and probably should be forgotten, and I know you disagree with me, Craig, but Scott felt the same way as I did when we discussed it years ago.
Oh no, I knew it. Oh, I have to take action now. Okay, sorry.
Taken was a successful high-concept action film with pleasingly crunchy fight scenes and the satisfaction of seeing the bad guys who force young women into sex slavery and their customers getting their comeuppance.
Craig, I mean, if you're getting upset about this, just think of literally any one of a million, like, 70s exploitation films. I mean, Taken didn't invent the revenge fantasy, and this is just another sort of take on it.
I know,
so
but
to speak.
don't say it's got anything good going for it. I love you both. I would take a bullet for you both, but why must we have... Okay, let's not have this conversation. Okay, I'm on board.
While it may pretend otherwise, You Were Never Really Here is largely the same film as Taken, but eschewing most of the action for an exploration of the psyche of the man delivering said comeuppance. Now, to be fair again, even with...
I love that you have to preposition this with a now. Hear me out.
Even with her limited feature work, I think we've established fairly well by this point in the podcast that Lynne Ramsay cares little, if anything, for narrative, preferring to focus more on mood, emotion and psychology. And that's fine, even if personally, as I mentioned earlier, I crave narrative satisfaction. But for a film to focus on those things, the mood, emotion and psychology, they have to be there. And here, they're just not.
And they were never really there.
There's nothing to this film. I mean, it's undeniably well made, and while Joaquin Phoenix receiving acting awards for this seems perhaps undeserved, his performance is certainly leagues beyond, for instance, Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant. Phoenix conveys Joe's anguish and the torment of his abusive upbringing and traumatic military service, and, well, that's about it. Johnny Greenwood's score, so often a highlight, doesn't feel so much out of place here as squandered, deserving of something of much more substance, as frankly is Phoenix's performance. Though his is, his mother, Judith Roberts aside, more or less the only performance in the film. The title You Were Never Really Here is clearly meant to be a comment on Joe, but actually, Joe is the only thing that is there, and it's everything else that really isn't.
I agree entirely, although I still kind of like the film at the end of the day. Everyone's comparing it to Taken purely because it was the most high-profile recent revenge thing, but it could be any of a million films, as I've said. I liked this film better when it was Commando or Old Boy or something like that. You know what I mean? And for a while, when he picked up that hammer, I was hoping it was going to get some proper Korean hammer violence,
Yes,
getting right into it. But no,
I saw that hammer.
none of
I'm
that.
thinking, please be Public Enemy. Please be Public Enemy.
Yes, but
God, there's a film we need to go back to.
it's just frustrating watching it because there's lots of things in there I really like, and as with all other films, it's really well put together, and I think Joaquin Phoenix does pretty well in it. Visually, it's I was going to say nice, not nice given the way it's shot, given what it's depicting, but it's really well shot. I think it looks good on screen, and I found the character compelling. What I couldn't get behind was the story, because I had almost no idea why anyone was doing what they were doing at any given moment. Aside from the overarching theme of get girl back, I didn't know why or why he was going to do the things he was doing or who he was meeting and all these kind of things. So just all that just was not particularly well explained to me. It needed a bit more explanation. I think, I suppose Ramsay's point might be that it's not all that important and just trying to move the visual along with it, but I need some story, I need some, as you say, narrative meat to get my teeth into, and this doesn't really have it. It kind of ignores most of the motivations and everything else that you'd normally expect to find in these kind of things. It just doesn't have it. Perhaps a lot of people just don't care about that, and they're just happy to see, they've seen enough of this sort of film that they can just take the art house view of it and appreciate what that kind of take would be as a intellectual curiosity more than anything else. But yeah, as a film, it's unsatisfying, which I think is a shame, because otherwise I kind of liked it. I like an awful lot about it, and even with that, one pretty, to my mind, critical omission, it still kind of came across as entertaining to me. I wouldn't certainly necessarily recommend anyone avoid it for any particular reason, but it's also hard to recommend a lot of people who would like it, other than just, as I've said, it's an interesting art house take on commonly held as a lowbrow classic. But overall, I'd still rather watch Commando, and that's where it comes back to.
So for someone like myself, so because I haven't watched Kevin or You Were Never Really Here yet, and I had professed my intention to watch You Were Never Really Here because it interested me to think of someone like Lynne Ramsay operating in that space, I guess you've You've
I
knocked
wouldn't-
that on the head, because it doesn't sound like she's actually doing anything all that interesting with it.
I don't
assumed
think
there
she
would be
brings
some.
anything particularly worthwhile to it.
No, I had assumed there would be some sort of, innately, I don't want to say female, but a perspective that Lynne Ramsay would be able to innately bring to that genre that would make it worthwhile seeing. But it sounds like actually I should probably put my eggs in. We need to talk
No.
about Kevin's basket
Absolutely,
instead.
yeah.
Yeah, it's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing remarkable about it. What she's done is she's tried to focus less on the act and more of the person doing the act. But I don't think that it's done in any way successfully.
Okay.
That the character, there are hints of interest about the character, and while Scott clearly liked it more than I did, I think we're largely on the same page about it, and it's well made, and I want to like it more. Like I said, there's none of her films that I actively dislike.
Yeah.
And I can find something of merit in all of them. It's kind of frustrating. I need more from this film, and it's like so many, I was going to say, so many exploitation films from the last 50 years, really, that it's trying to focus a wee bit more on mood, and I just don't think it does it particularly
Maybe a
successfully.
disappointment then, but not necessarily a surprise. And I guess if you don't, without considering what we know now, having partaken of Lynne Ramsay's body of work, I suppose I feel like this genre, that sort of revenge, that very, like you say, Drew, the airport paperback revenge movie, I think very much stuck in a rut. I don't know what it is differently that we can do on that now, and I suspect that if anything is going to give that genre a jolt, the likelihood is that it will come from a female director offering a perspective on that stuff that we haven't really considered before. And I suppose disappointed in that respect then that Ramsay's not delivered that. But actually, if we take a step back and consider it in the context of the rest of her body of work, maybe actually not surprising.
I suspect the source material is a problem too. She adapted the screenplay, but it's from a novella.
Right.
And the film's only 89 minutes. Most of her films are actually about that length.
Yeah.
The only one that's slightly longer is by about 20 minutes is We Need to Talk About Kevin. So she's very efficient. And I guess when you're focusing more on mood than narrative, it's easier to do that.
It's smart to know not to outstay your welcome. Yeah.
Maybe necessary then too, yes. But I'm not sure that the work it's based on is particularly well regarded, but also I remember thinking, this is 89 minutes, and I'm watching this thinking, 89 minutes is a bit of a stretch.
Really?
Is this it? And then, not that I was bored, but more just like it didn't feel like there was enough substance in there to even cover that time. And then I found out that it's from a novella that is itself only 90 pages long. I was like, well, that probably explains that. But it's just kind of so, the story's so generic. Because it's been in so many films, and then the twist that people in positions of power are doing naughty things is like, really?
Yeah.
And I have definitely seen that
Roll me
in
down.
every police procedural I've ever watched.
So what do you think it was then that would have attracted? Because like you say, Lynne Ramsay is someone who, she doesn't poke her head above water often. I mean, there was 9 years between Morvern Callar and We Need to Talk About Kevin, and 6 years between that and this, was it? Did we say?
Yeah.
So what was it about this then? What was it about this material that might have compelled her to take it on board?
Good question. I don't know. Having not read the book, but certainly something I read earlier suggested that what she's done is stripped out a lot of the sentimentality or so from the novella. So I guess there's not really an awful lot more in it than that.
Right. Bizarre.
I'm not sure, without having read that, what might have been the hook there, but it's not. Because, for instance, Morvern Callar and We Need to Talk About Kevin were both based on books as well. So she does apparently like literary adaptation, and she's generally the screenwriter herself. Yeah. Like all the time, in fact. But whereas, We Need to Talk About Kevin, very well regarded book, and with a deep narrative, strong characterization and stuff, but a 90-page novella that feels like it could have been written by any of 100 people, and in fact has been. Yeah.
I wonder if it's been that she felt like stripping away the sentimentality and the bravado and whatnot that often weighs that sort of stuff down might be saying enough in and of itself. But that's interesting. I still kind of feel like I should, Well, when a director's body of work encompasses 4 movies, I feel like it's remiss of me to say I have to choose between. We need to talk about Kevin and this. I should probably watch them both, actually. But,
yes, but definitely prioritise the former.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you will still find something to appreciate in this film. It's just not a patch on me to talk about Kevin. So if you're going to prioritise it, definitely that's the one to go for.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we're going to briefly talk about her short films, Scott, given her output is so scant, really.
Sure. I mean, we've not discussed short films before in this podcast or at any point I recall in our previous incarnation, so this is a 15-year streak we're breaking, I guess. Yeah, but I mean, the reason, I think at least personally, we've not done so is I tend not to get an awful lot of joy out of short films, regardless of the quality.
I don't yet. I think by their nature, certainly by trend, they are often much more experimental. And I mean, it maybe fits with Lynne Ramsay that they're very often more about mood than narrative necessarily. Yes, I, in general, don't get an awful lot out of short films. Animated shorts are separate. The animated shorts tend to work pretty well. But live action shorts in particular. So I remember one we watched, Scott. I'm guessing it was something like 10 or 15 minutes long, but it felt like about 8 hours. And I think it was a Serbian film, black and white. And it was basically a man went to work. And that was it. And I've seen too many shorts that are like that, or just baffling things. Yes, I don't get a lot out of short films, so I'm not particularly eager to speak about them on a podcast generally.
Yes, I like speed narratives,
Yes.
And the very shortness of short films tends to limit that aspect, so as you say, they kind of feel like showreels to me for various aspects of production, which is fine, but it's not my cup of tea. Ramsay's released 4 short features over a career, and while they're all pretty good in one regard and another, I'm not sure it's had much of an effect on my overall opinion of shorts. It does, however, track quite well with her progression as a filmmaker, so there's some interest in that aspect if you like her films or just film in general. All of these are available, perhaps not entirely legally, on YouTube, but as I think it's only ever been possible to buy one of these and a now out-of-print DVD, I don't think we should get too hung up about the legality of directing y'all in that direction. The earliest, Small Deaths, is a selection of flashbacks to various moments in a young girl's life. The moments of embarrassment or humiliation that burn into your mind, even as the rational part of you knows that most likely no one else on the planet either remembers or cares about them. It's quite well observed and executed. Well worth a look, particularly if you want to train yourself on the deployment of Glasgow dialect to obscure communication. It's a little known fact that during World War II, the Allied forces secured their voice comms from snooping by having only Ouija's as radio operators. Gasman continues looking at Glasgow youth, also feeling like it could be autobiographical. 2 kids are sent with their dad to a Christmas party, on the way meeting a woman and her kids that also seem strangely familiar with her dad. Again, well observed, but other than moments of sympathy, I didn't get all that much from it. I think my problem with most of these, and good shorts in general, is that I'm left wanting more from it, and to know the characters better. And, well, it's a feature, so that's me out of luck. So these 2 came before her first feature, Ratcatcher, so if they were the demo reels to secure her that job, then job done, I suppose. That continues into Kill the Day, released between Ratcatcher and Morvern Callar. It's a whistle-stop tour of a drug addict's life, bouncing around with we need to talk about Kevin's non-linearity through James Gallagher, played by James Ramsay's early life, drug addiction, incarceration for theft, and attempt to go straight. Again, I don't think there's anything I particularly dislike about it, apart from wishing that it could be fleshed out with a longer running time. But again, then it's not a short. I don't think this story could be told much better by anyone else given the time limitations, but in that regard, I do respect it, but again, there's not enough here to truly satisfy me. Her latest short, Swimmer, shares a few things with her latest film, primarily that it has moved the slider all the way up to style at the expense of substance. A beautifully shot in ultra contrasty black and white, but there's no cohesive narrative to speak of at all in it. Bloke swims down a river, and increasingly odd things happen with little rhyme or reason.
There's no cohesive narrative, Scott. There is no narrative.
Not one at all, no. It's my least favourite of her works. But even with that said, it looks good enough and is short enough that it's almost worth watching just to enjoy the visuals. However, there's very little to take from it apart from that.
Yeah, I'm going to begin with Swimmer, because it's one you've mentioned most recently. That is the one that I wanted to like most of it because it did look so nice.
Yeah.
That very crisp black and white footage. But I have no idea what was going on and I didn't care. I'd read it described as some sort of trip to the British Isles and there was lots of nationalistic music, and I'm thinking, you've watched a different...
I
short
read
film
that,
because
and it's wrong.
yes, none of that is correct. And like, I'm not quite sure what the point was. So there's a sound clip from The Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner at some point, and then so there's sounds of people playing paper, scissors, stone. I have no idea what any of that's meant to mean because it had no impact to me at all. It was like, there's some sound here. Okay. It very much is style over substance. Whereas to go back to Killing the Day, that's the one actually I would have liked it to have been a bit more, not stylistic, but like a bit heavier into her imagery and stuff, because it felt like it would be the one thing that would particularly benefit from it.
Yeah.
That because it's about an addict, if it's kind of focused more on his feelings rather than the things that were happening to him, I think it would be a bit more successful. And it's reasonably good. But I think actually the perhaps suggesting with his addictions and his withdrawals or whatever, that like distorted reality or just like the kind of focusing on like what was going on in his head, I think that actually if she'd gone heavier on that would have worked better.
Yeah.
The first two though, Small Deaths and Gasman. Gasman's the one I liked most, but they suffer from, those are the most narrative ones. So they're also the ones like, whoa, what happened next?
Yeah.
Don't stop, no, don't stop now. Yes, if you're getting interested in her work, it's worth looking them up on YouTube. In particular, Small Deaths and Gasman, in terms of style and narrative and setting, very much feel like precursors to Ratcatcher, even though one of them came after. But you can see that a lot with directors. They start off in short films because they're short, they're less expensive, less strenuous to make, and then recycle those ideas when they go to a feature. Even though not all of the things she's made are set in the 1970s, it almost feels, we need to talk about Kevin aside, that all of her films and short films are or could be set in the 1970s. And I think somebody needs to remind Lynne Ramsay other decades are available. But yeah, they're worth looking at. And again, her body of work is pretty small, so if you like the films, then you're probably going to want to see them just to see more of her stuff, because there's not a lot available.
Yeah.
We had any feedback on the social medias?
Yes, there's been a few. The shortest and sweetest comes from the Exploding Helicopter podcast, whose take on You Were Never Really Here is that it's a movie for people who feel like watching and enjoying Taken is somehow beneath them, which is a fair enough comment on that, I guess. And also something which, with apologies, I will abridge slightly, but our friend Stephen Nelson sent us a review of You Were Never Really Here, which short answer is, the short version is he likes it a lot, but one of the few things that he'd go out of his way to see at the cinema for in the art house realms. But he thinks that both Lynne Ramsay and Joaquin Phoenix are kind of underrated, and it's a perfect pairing to dig at the dirty and disturbing underbelly of a cliched hitman revenge tale, a refreshing counterpoint to the bombastic Taken and Equalizer franchises. Again, he was very taken with the psychological routine and the protagonist's blunt and clinical approach to his work, and liked the Johnny Goodman score. Hadn't seen a anti-hero's viewpoint, which he emphasised with so keenly since encountering Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood, which is a powerful comparison to make, but I've got to say I don't quite see it myself. But yes, he thinks that Lynne Ramsay has crafted a visceral and poignant film which deeply affected him, and it's less a thriller and more a character study of someone who's emotionally swamped by violence and yet seeks redemption in tender kindness. These stark contrasts are unsettling, engrossing and compelling to witness. So yes, there is a lot of people who are taking an awful lot of joy from You Were Never Really Here, which unfortunately we don't quite share, but even then, it's not a film that I'm going to say anyone should avoid, so certainly recommended from some people. He's also hoping that we could give Karen Gillan a plug for The Party's Just Beginning, the film that she's directing, so something we'd be happy to do, but don't know if that's actually coming out yet. I've not seen, don't know where that's coming from.
She was directing.
I'd seen a few tweets about it, but I don't know quite where it's going from.
In as much as one of the stars of Guardians of the Galaxy needs a plug from Words on Film, but we're happy to do it.
Well, yes, come on, we've given a lot of those guys a leg up, Drew.
We know Chris Pratt would not be where he is now without us, Craig.
No, exactly. There's a reason why Robert Downey Jr. has me tattooed on his arse.
So we'll put that full review up on the website, I think, if he's okay with that. And yes, for your edification. But we'd also like to just take this moment to thank anyone else who's been retweeting us or doing so in the Twitter sphere. And
You're doing a man's work.
And if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so either through email, podcast@fudsonfilm. You can get us on the Twitters, such as @fudsonfilm, or indeed on facebook.com/fudsonfilm, if that's the way you roll.
You can find us in the street and just take us down. We deserve it. Take us down.
Only if you have a particular set of skills.
Yes, that make you a nightmare for people like us. Oh dear.
So we'll be back with you on the 10th with another podcast of some description. But until that time, take care of yourself and each other. You can say goodbye if you'd like.
Nah. All right.
I would just like to say...
go on then.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
I would just like to say that I bit my tongue really badly earlier, and it's actually quite badly swollen, and I've had a great deal of difficulty enunciating on this one, so thank you for putting up with me.
Swole.
I'm not joking. It feels really frickin' weird.